So, Clarence, welcome to 10 Across Conversations. Thanks for taking time out of your very busy schedule.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here and to share what is going on in cities, towns, and villages throughout America, and especially in the regions that you're working in. So I'm excited to be able to share our thoughts.
Great. I heard you at the ULI National Meeting in Los Angeles with several other panelists talking about the issues involving cities right now. And obviously, there's a lot to discuss from cores of downtowns and changes in office buildings to issues of housing and homelessness to larger issues of climate impacts and resilience in cities. But let's start with your background. Obviously, you were a mayor for a few decades, and you've been in your current position for almost a decade. Tell us how you came to this work.
Wow. Really, it's a lived experience in a way. I grew up in rural Florida, agricultural community, where the per capita income was about 13,000 per family, in a sense, very poor. And always felt as if public policy was important for the residents that lived in our community. And when I say that, if to me, if it wasn't for the food programs that the federal government provided to our community, we wouldn't be able to survive. Whether it was affordable housing, in that it was community development block grants that helped us to be able to have a better house than we did before. And it wasn't that we owned it, but at least it was, we called it the projects, but it was a house. And then if you think about the right to vote, that legislation was able to help us to be able to participate in America's elections process. And finally, I can tell you, as it relates to my opportunity to go to undergrad, grad school, and other areas, the Basic Equal Opportunity Grant was my way of being able to create an opportunity to have the American dream. So I always recognized at that point that public policy does have an impact and can make an impact on the lives of people and residents that live in communities. And I know there's a lot of other Clarences out there in America that I hope their mayors and their council members are helping to make their lives better. And I looked up on the dais after I came back from grad school, and there was very few people that looked like me, African American, on the dais. And I stood up and raised my hand at an old age of 23 and said, I can do this job. And I found that I could, but it wasn't easy. So places like the National League of Cities were places that I looked for to help me to be a better leader. And now I'm blessed that I am the CEO and executive director. And that's a cliff note. There's so much more in between, but I just wanted to say that, man, I have the best job in America because I can have an impact on the lives of people that live in cities, towns, and villages so that they can make their community better.
It sounds like you do have a great job and one that really fits you well, and that you had incredible awareness as a young person about how the mechanics of support from the federal government relate to maybe what's happening in the state, to cities and communities, which got you started very early. And so that's fascinating to hear that you were that observant about all of that. So
I don't think I can say that. I can't tell you I knew what I was doing at that time, but I grew into it, just like, I grew into the face I have that I wear around every day, but I grew into it. And it does help me to work with municipal leaders throughout America.
Sure. And you have some mayors. Mayor Broom is a good friend of ours. She's been to some of our conferences. The mayor of Baton Rouge, who I think is your first vice president. I knew Mayor Landrew's father, Moon Landrew, when I lived in New
Yeah.
Orleans for a long time. Mark Morial, his father is the mayor, and Mark. So we have a lot of mayors, including the leadership that's come out of San Antonio and elsewhere in the Ten Across Project. And it's interesting to see mayors finding seats in Washington in federal positions and moving like yourself into situations where they can influence the national discussion. It seems obvious, but are mayors uniquely qualified to bring what we need to hear about where we are as a country, and we need to actually make more room for them in DC?
I believe in that, and I think that would be great because they really do have their pulse on the hands, the pulse on the lives of what is happening in communities throughout America. Because once you're mayor, you never forget
Hmm.
about how to make things happen
Hmm.
in local communities. I also think that what they bring is that connectivity to and knowledge to working with the state legislatures because they had to work with them, and then ultimately, as they look at the federal landscape, they also understand how to work across the aisle and they to get things done. Because, we often say, if you want something done, call a mayor and they'll get it done.
Hmm.
And we're very, very pleased that we have those mayors like Mayor Weston Broom, uh, you know, former Mayor Buttigieg, who's now Secretary of DOT,
Right.
uh, Mayor Steve Benjamin, who's working in the White House in public engagement, reaching out to municipal leaders. And so we're hoping that we will continue to see that trend of
Hmm.
mayors who are leading because the other part, they're CEOs. Some of
Hmm.
them employ 30,000, 40,000 people, run a budget of billions of dollars in their communities.
Hmm.
So we know how to run a business. We know how to make decisions. We also know how to bring people together
Right.
around a table from industry. So I'm hoping that that trend continues. For the final reason is I know them. They're good people and they're good friends. So it does help to get a call returned from them when they get in these roles.
And I'll bet you do. Mayor Gallego here in Phoenix is doing a fantastic job in that regard. And her predecessor, Mayor Stanton, now
Yep.
Representative Stanton, is in DC. And I just know the value of the mayor's ability to bring his or her experience to DC and have that impact discussions in the Capitol is hugely important. But let's talk about the relations between several layers of government. Because in our corridor, which runs roughly where the I-10 connects California to Florida, we have we have the three largest states with interesting visions of what governance is and maybe even democracy is. And then we have cities operating, whether it's in a red state or a blue state, doesn't matter, in a variety of ways. But there's some interesting relations, and you mentioned it, between states and cities. And neither you or I want to get political in this discussion or others. We're here to help everybody and just observe situations. But it's interesting to see what's happening with regard to the conversation between state legislatures, between mayors and councils. And it's not always the same kind of discussion. It's not always red state, blue cities. And California is fascinating with regard to housing, the
Mhm.
discussion between the mayor and the governor. So, how do you see that relationship, which seems to be more dynamic, if you will, of late?
Yeah, well, we see it trending in the wrong direction, very candidly. Municipal officials were elected by their residents to lead their community,
Hmm.
and every community is different. And we may not like what that community decides for the future of their community, but that's why they got elected. It's about home rule
Hmm.
and local authority. But state preemptions of local government is an incredibly a big issue, and it's becoming a bigger problem for city leaders across the country because when states abuse their preemption ability, they take away the power of local leaders, especially
Hmm.
ones that traditionally made decisions for their own community. In 2023 alone, more than 650 preemption bills were introduced in state legislative sessions, covering topics such as education, housing, workforce issues, LGBTQ plus rights,
Right.
public safety. I mean, I can go on and on, municipal broadband. And in the states that you work across, it is significantly even more impactful on the inability. The state legislature is trying to overtake the responsibility of local groups.
Hmm.
So at the end of the day, local government is the form of government that we often say, and it's true. It's closest to the people. We know what's best for our residents.
Hmm.
And mayors and council members are out in their community every day.
Yep.
And what we're fighting against is trying to um, help state legislatures understand that leaders need to make decisions that are best for their community.
Hmm.
But what we're seeing across America, including the regions of 10 across
Hmm.
states, we're seeing state governments trying to design public policy that would fit a one size fit all community, and it
Yep.
doesn't. That's why we have the diversity of America.
And when we decided to embark on this project, we knew that the area that we cover, again, between California, running through Texas, Arizona and Texas, all the way to Florida, that we were seeing that friction, if you will. And it does have a certain color about it, blue
Mhm.
and red, and we get that. Um, but it's also as part of a federal discussion. Having just come off the New Hampshire primary yesterday, I think we know what that's about. Um, and you're talking about the impact on the citizens in that locality. It's fascinating to watch what's happening with Houston and Austin. When I say Austin, I'm talking about the legislature. But cities are drivers of our economy. It's where the innovation is happening, where companies are located. Great ideas seem to be generated in cities because of their diversity and the dynamism of cities. Usually there's a university in the mix somewhere. You may not like everything you see from a state level, but you have to acknowledge that cities are hugely important, and to reduce their ability to be what they are and to attract the talent they have to keep this country going, not just the city going, is massively important. So it's interesting how preemption is actually a much larger discussion. I'm sure you would probably see it the same way.
I do, and as a matter of fact, I'm going to make your first contribution to Mayor Ryder for mayor of your city. Given the speech that you just made, Duke, you would make an amazing mayor. But I think it's even it's even deeper than that. For us at the National League of Cities, we fight every day for nonpartisan
Mhm.
results and outcomes, because we often say that a truck is not red or blue. Water that runs through the faucets, it ain't red or blue.
Mhm.
The key to your opportunity to own a home, it's not red or blue.
Mhm.
These are real solutions or real challenges that we need solutions to.
Right.
Guess who can do it best? It's local leaders. We
Mhm.
can do it best. You can't sit in Tallahassee and create policy for Jacksonville, Florida,
Mhm.
the mayor that sits there. You
Mhm.
can't sit in any other Austin and create some results for Fort Worth. I mean, it
Yeah.
just doesn't work like that.
Right.
And you're right. This is not just a Democratic or Republican issue. The mayor of California is creating mandates on local communities, or he will hold money back,
Yeah.
take money back from cities who don't abide by his rules or his mandate.
Right. The
That's
governor of California, I think you meant to say, Governor Newsom.
Governor Newsom,
Right.
yes.
Right.
And he in fact has to be able to allow cities to design their housing
Right.
vision according to what that community wants. However, there's a problem in housing.
Mhm.
What's the solution? We sit around the table and we talk about it. We figure out some results or some outcomes that we'd like to see, and then we work toward positive results.
Right.
That's what good public policy is. Good public policy is not policy that's mandated.
Right.
It's inclusive.
Let's talk about the topic that you just mentioned, which is housing, which captures a lot of what you and I are discussing in terms of either the friction or the possibility. There was just an article here in the Arizona Republic this past Sunday that was maybe the most direct that I've read about, even in a place with as much land mass as we have. I mean, sprawl is affiliated with Phoenix for a region. We don't lack for places to build housing, but the debates about who's in that housing may have to do with, as you mentioned, people who look like you or look like me, or just density. And that the notion of apartments and renters, those words are being thrown around as if they were four-letter words. It's sort of fascinating because we're not stuffed into a small situation where people don't have room to breathe and do the kind of things they need to do in a place. Yet the arguments about what is housing and who's in that housing and the nature of it is becoming pretty heated in this community as it is elsewhere, which is why Governor Newsom, I think, said, for all of you having these discussions, let me help you out. Let's have a larger rule to get you to yes, so that we can find more housing for everybody. So tell me more about how housing is on your radar. I know that it is, but the ways that you're trying to address this matter.
Well, you're right. It's on our radar because it's one of the top challenges that city leaders are facing. And we recognize that millions of households are now priced out of home ownership, and they're grappling with the housing costs and the burden of that cost taking up sometimes 30 to 40 to 50% of their income. And a lot of folks are lacking shelter, quality shelter. And it is disproportionately impacting people of color. And so we increasingly have a need for policies to address the national housing shortfall at the root of the affordability crisis that exists in America right now. NLC conducted a survey from January 2023 to February to learn more about the challenges that cities are facing. And really, it's in every category, it's about supply as well.
Yes.
Not just affordability, but supply.
Right.
And we wanted to find a pathway to try to come up with some solutions. And so the findings reveal that expanding or diversifying local housing supply stands out as the highest priority. So what do? We recognize that there are hurdles, and those hurdles can include labor in the construction area, limitation on financing new construction and renovations, difficulty in getting access to financing, period, for residents.
Yes.
Big regulatory obstacles are there, community opposition, and then state preemption. So what did we do? We brought all of the partners together and set a table where we created a housing accelerator initiative. The home builders, the realtors, the finance community, the American Planning Association. Because what we were seeing was everybody was pointing their finger at cities. You're the problem because your permitting processes are bad. Your zoning, you won't increase higher density. And so we're able to work around, sit around the table and come up with solutions. And we have done that.
Great.
And we met for an entire year. So what do we suggest? A number of the things that we're suggesting includes, let's find a way to streamline the permitting process so that it doesn't take so long to get it approved. Let's come up with creative tax incentives that gives developers opportunities to be able to achieve some incentives for providing supply and affordability to the residents, especially the young families or the young adults who are just graduating from college and can't even afford an apartment in Washington, D.C., and San Francisco, and cities all over America. And I think that trying to come up with not just one pill that's going to solve the issue
Mhm.
and you're going to get better by taking it. What we're saying is that it's going to take all of those layers to figure out how we stack a system. Then we can afford some affordable housing within communities throughout America.
I might add equipping the community, and this would be a problem or an opportunity for mayors and city councils, equipping the community with the language to talk about this. Because in some cases, what this article that I was citing here in Arizona was that some of the zoning has been addressed, some of the hurdles to get something permitted have been addressed. But when it got down to public presentations, there was a sort of, and I will call it manufactured anger. Oh, we don't want this near us. The assumption that if it's rental, that there's something negative about that. And yet, you, I, others go and visit wonderful cities and the neighborhoods that we so enjoy, and the restaurants that are there, and or the retail that's there, other things are often rental neighborhoods. People enjoy
Hmm.
being there, and they stay there for quite some time. So we've got to figure out what these words actually mean and what the outcomes really are, because people there's a tendency to leap to the worst possibility, which creates friction, which I think is unnecessary. You've probably seen the
Yeah,
same.
yeah, we do. But what we want to see, and every resident visualizes themselves when they're growing up in a city or
Hmm.
in a community. One day, I will be able to call that place my home.
Right,
And you can't do that until you can afford a
right,
home where you can see yourself driving into the driveway and parking and turning that key and walking in, and
right,
your family is there. That's the American dream.
right.
But what we're doing is that, uh, in some ways, we've seen people have been priced out of that
Yes,
dream. And
yeah,
sometimes it turns into a nightmare that, in fact, turns into um, residents becoming homeless
right,
or not sheltered.
right.
And we have to speak a word in terms of inclusive zoning,
Hmm.
um, density, and it's the whole concept is not a NIMBY, but a YIMBY,
Right,
not in my backyard, but yes, in my backyard.
right.
And I think that we can set tables locally with the business community, with the finance community to be able to structure financing that can increase the supply of housing, but also structure financing such that if I go for a mortgage, I'm not starting at 9, 10%.
Hmm.
I could actually start at 4%
Hmm.
and get that home. Don't have to put down 20% down payment because it's not necessary. Piling on the insurance that goes into my mortgage. I mean, so there's a lot of things that we got to work through, but guess who's doing it? Mayors, city council members, city
Right.
managers, community development, nonprofits are putting the pencil to paper to be able to say, here's our solution that works for our community, and we can solve it ourselves
Hmm.
if, in fact, we are committed to inclusive development and designing a community that all levels can afford to live there. And it doesn't matter where your zip code is, the opportunity to have a home and a place called home is the ultimate goal. And local leaders can do that. Federal government can't do that.
Can't
State
imagine.
leaders.
Can't imagine
But we
anybody.
need partners. We need partners though. We can't do it alone. That's
Right,
that's our theme. We need partners.
right. I can't imagine anybody would disagree with that. I mean, I think that is the American dream, and the end towards which a lot of us are driving. So maybe we'll return to housing and maybe even a little bit of discussion about homelessness. But some of the other issues as we're building cities, as we're building the places where we spend all of our time working or doing other things, infrastructure is in and has been in the news for quite some time, and
Yes.
definitions of infrastructure vary considerably. You mentioned Secretary Buttigieg, a former mayor. Obviously, a lot of discussion about highways. And as you know, in the Tenacross region, what highways did to communities and cities was very negative. and
Hmm.
sometimes intentionally so. Not so much the negativity, but separating communities from other areas and separating peoples. You've spent a lot of time with the American Rescue Plan Act and getting infrastructure bills passed. And I know good friends of ours like Dr. Robert Bullard have tried to make sure that equitable arrangements are made as we reimagine infrastructure. Your thoughts about definitions of infrastructure and how it can be a positive contributor to a community as opposed to what it might have been in the past, which was sort of literally bulldozing through communities.
Yeah, in graduate school and my urban planning classes, that was one of the historical things that they talked to us about to how do you create um, an infrastructure system that pulls communities together and not pull them apart.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen so many highways and bridges that have railroad tracks that have really separated families, separated communities, and then build a sense of community. I think that, first of all, I think President Biden for ARPA as well as the bipartisan infrastructure law. Because as we think backwards a little bit around infrastructure and COVID and the impact that it had on our nation, I'll acknowledge that, also appreciate the CARES Act that President Trump implemented, because it stopped the bleeding in some ways of communities falling apart, businesses closing,
Mm-hmm.
and it provided money to those cities that were large cities. But the ARPA dollars really said that we're going to give those dollars directly to you to address all of the challenges and the impact that COVID had on your community. And then the bipartisan infrastructure dollars came in after that to really say that, America, you had a D plus for 30 years by the American Society of Engineers.
Right.
And it's time now that we don't accept a D plus in our infrastructure. So what we did was we worked with our members to really think long term about how do we create economic solutions, such as connecting housing to transportation
Mm-hmm.
as you develop your plan.
Mm-hmm.
The law also provided opportunities for cities to do it in an equitable way. You talked about the bridges and things like that. There was actually grant dollars that said, if you have a plan that can
Right.
be used to bring communities together, apply for these grant dollars and we'll help you to be able to do that. So cities like Madison, Wisconsin, um, they even use their dollars to attack the issue of climate resilience. Um, and the city itself dedicated like $250,000 of its ARPA funds to projects focused on increasing energy efficiency and adding solar panels to their community.
Mm-hmm.
Tulsa, Oklahoma, the city of Tulsa allocated 20,500 of its dollars to bike share programs. So we really are being creative
Mm-hmm.
in the way in which we're using those dollars to use infrastructure dollars to address and connect the entire community economically, housing, climate resiliency, water and wastewater systems where communities didn't have quality water for years, whether it was Flint or other communities. And I'm proud that our city leaders didn't say, let's just pave some roads. Why
Right.
don't we just throw up another bridge?
Right.
What they said was that they're going to use that to connect their community
Mm-hmm.
long term to being sustainable and stronger as it ends, as the funding comes to close.
And you're right. There were some grants coming out of Department of Transportation. Again, I credit Secretary Buttigieg and others that literally said, this is about connecting communities. Apply
Yeah.
for this so that we stitch communities back together, some which were incredibly bisected when the 10 was built. I'm thinking of Houston. I'm thinking of what almost happened in New Orleans and what did happen on Claiborne Avenue and elsewhere.
Mhm.
So putting these things back together is fascinating. But you also mentioned
You
resilience.
know, I don't think people recognize how important transportation is. I mean, you imagine this. You live an hour and a half away from your job,
Yeah.
and which is not a good deal. But if we could get a transportation system that brings first create an opportunity to get housing close to your job, so that you can check on your kids during the day. It's just basic
Hmm.
things
Hmm.
that the roads and the wastewater water systems, the pipes under the roads, are just as important as what we see in terms of the structures on top of it. So
Right.
I'm glad you asked me about that, because I want our listeners to know that they gotta think about the future a little bit more uh, intentional around connectivity of all of the needs of their residents, not just those that they see visually.
So the hallmark of the Ten Across Project is leveraging our awareness of the future because we can see what's happening. And I often say that probably no society in history has ever had more access to the future than we do. We can see the charts and graphs, we have the data, we can visualize it. So if you can see what needs to be done, then you really don't have any excuse for not getting ahead of it. And often that involves cities and infrastructure, including the part that you don't see below ground, as well as what you see on a daily basis. But it's hard to make that case, especially for the stuff that you don't see, raising the
Right.
money, getting people to tax themselves to do that. But with climate change and the impacts on cities, and everybody knows about urban heat islands, and it's not going to get any cooler in our lifetimes. So we have to prepare for a different kind of future. When you're talking about issues like that with cities, with mayors, with city councils and communities, how do you make it such that this is a possibility for improvement over, boy, this is grim. We either need to escape this or I'm not sure what else to do. How do you turn what's obviously a real challenge and highly impactful in some people's lives with regard to their health, et cetera, certainly here in Phoenix with regard to heat, how do you turn that argument from a difficulty into an opportunity?
I started this um, podcast conversation around lived experience, growing up in Florida, right?
Hmm.
Every year, consistently over and over again, seeing hurricanes come through communities and destroying those communities. Going down to Miami Beach, watching the erosion of the beach and the sand systems at Miami Beach, and basically the beach after the hurricane is downtown Miami.
Hmm.
Uh, Looking long term at the studies, working to create a climate compact between the three counties, Palm Beach, Broward, and Dade County,
Hmm.
because it was in the faces of the residents
Yeah.
every every year, and sometimes, especially during the summertime when it would rain. While you're in a meeting, you come out and you can't even drive your car because Miami Beach has been flooded. And I think that there are communities starting to see that uh, over and over again. Last year, NLC was very focused on helping pass legislation and deliver federal aid to address extreme heat that many cities are facing as a
Hmm.
consequence of climate.
Hmm.
We can ignore it, but it's real. And so, extreme heat in American cities is a bigger problem now than ever before. So in Phoenix, where you
Hmm.
are,
Hmm.
uh, the city hit 31 straight days. I could not believe that last year of 110 degrees, 31 straight days.
If I'm not mistaken, last summer, as we were interviewing Jeff Goodell and his book, The Heat Will Kill You First in LA, I think when we ended the summer season, so to speak, we had well over 50 days of 115.
Wow.
So those are unprecedented heat waves. I think I've got my stats right there. And as Jeff points out, and he tries to do it in a way that says, come on, folks, let's get it together. That is the future. We're going to all have to deal with it, our kids and our grandkids. And there are opportunities for managing that, but we've really got to get after it now.
Well, being a Florida guy, I can tell you every time I'm in Arizona, it's that hot. You guys always say, but it's a different kind of heat. I would like roll you can't see, guys, y'all can't see my eyes, but they're rolling right now. But we know we got to advocate.
Yeah.
And we did last year, the Extreme Heat Emergency Act of 2023, um, which added extreme heat events to FEMA's list of major disasters
Yeah.
because all over America, we saw the stories over and over again of how people were dying
Yes.
because of this. So this law is going to be very helpful because it, really allowed local government to access funding that it, just helped them to extend critical support to their homeless population as well.
Mm-hmm.
So these events will keep happening.
Yeah.
And local leaders are standing up. Mayors all over America are signing climate
Mm-hmm.
compacts, and they're making a commitment to address this issue. So, again, this is something that if you want something done and focused on, you call local leaders. We know what we
Right.
need in our communities. And as a matter of fact, we've launched a program, the Local Infrastructure Hub program, to help city leaders to be able to apply for grants, the medium and small cities in America. Because the large cities like Phoenix, they got, you know, 20 staff people that do nothing but that. But little old South Bay, Florida, where I grew up,
Mm-hmm.
the city manager is the public works director and the city manager
Yeah.
and the trash collector.
Yeah.
So we're not that city. So we are really helping cities to be able to do that. And we've helped 680 communities
Mm-hmm.
put funding applications to address major issues. And I'm really, really honored to be able to say today, to date, we've been able to achieve about $66 million
Hmm.
that's going to local communities that historically have never gotten dollars. And today they're getting money from the federal government to address many of the issues that we're talking about, including climate,
Congratulations.
including.
That,
Yeah,
that
it's been a huge success,
we're
and I'm proud.
we're getting pulled into some of that with regard to FEMA's efforts to allow, especially those communities of smaller scale who may not have the means to prepare for some things that are happening. So I think what you have accomplished is incredible. And you mentioned, my possibility of being a mayor. I don't think that's going to happen, but you were vocalizing something that we say all the time. Well, you should join our team. The lived experience that you enjoyed, combined with the now incredibly accurate data and earth observing technologies that allow us to marry what you're experiencing on the ground with the trend line that says in Miami and the water that you're stepping into a flood, maybe, even on a sunny day. Here's where that's going. And therefore, we have the evidence that should propel us to move things forward. And again, mayors have that access to the lived experience as well as the complex data. So let's
And
talk.
your resident and your residents see it, and they'll
Oh, yeah.
they'll invest in it.
Yeah.
That's the point. The lived experience of hurricanes and floods and fires and heat says that there is a problem.
Yeah.
We recognize it, and we want to be helpful. And I'm
Hmm.
talking as a resident. We want you to help us solve this. So I'm excited that
Yeah.
the cities that you work
Hmm.
with across the regions
Hmm.
are ready to get involved in these topics.
And we have an incredible network of chief resilience and chief heat officers in these cities who have enjoyed becoming part of our project. And we've certainly benefited enormously from the information they've shared about lived experience of their residents that they serve and the called it high tech approaches to it, meaning they want to know what the future looks like. And so they're employing all kinds of tools to observe that and then respond appropriately. But lived experience also gets things, if you will, out of the political agenda,
Yes.
out of the rhetorical discussions about whether climate change is real or not, or the role of government, which is really helpful. And that's sort of how I'd like to bring our conversation to a close. It's a difficult time to be a public servant, uh, even if you're the librarian in town, or if you're on a city council or in a school council, because the rhetoric around these issues isn't often based on a reality or lived experience. And let's hope that what people observe causes them to say, okay, as you pointed out earlier, it's not red or blue. Climate change or other issues belong to all of us. But how do you help the next generation of leaders that are seeing the difficult experiences that some of their colleagues are having in the public realm manage that? Because
Yeah.
we're moving into a different time, and 2024 is going to be quite an experiment, I think.
I look back in 1984 when I got elected. City Hall business occurred at City Hall.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't occur on the front lawns of my home.
Hmm.
It didn't occur at the grocery store. I mean, there were complaints, but people weren't attacking me.
And it didn't occur on Twitter or
It did
or
not
X, things like that.
occur on Twitter because the time I got elected, I was just being able to have one of those big mobile phones riding in the car and stuff. So I'm old school, but that old school feel was a level of respect,
Mm-hmm.
collegiality. Politics wasn't a bad word. Compromise was not a bad word. And I think now what we were starting to see, especially during the pandemic, started seeing more articles about municipal leaders being attacked,
Mm.
state leaders being attacked, federal leaders being attacked. And so we did this report. We wrote this report on the front lines of today's cities.
Mm-hmm.
And it said about 81% of local public officials that were surveyed reported that they had experienced some form of harassment,
Mm-hmm.
threats, and violence. Ranging from racist slurs to physical attack, death threats, toward their family
Mm-hmm.
as well. And so we know that we have a responsibility at the National League of Cities to help our leaders to be able to understand what is going on and what are some of the ways that they could, in fact, address some of these forms of harassment. It first starts with our colleagues on the dais.
Mm-hmm.
We have to lead in a respectful way because kids see us on the dais and they say, oh, if my mayor and council are fighting, clearly that's the way public policy is created.
Right.
And so we're doing that. And they are, in fact, leading in that way. And the other thing is, the impact it's having is uh, we're seeing more people saying, I'm out of here. I didn't sign up for that.
Right.
And so we're seeing at the federal, state, as well as local level, uh, uh, leaders not
Right.
deciding to run again
Right.
or deciding that they're not going to be a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we got to work together. We got to be able to create barriers so that folks don't feel that it is right or they have a right
Right.
to have these attacks.
If
And I'm excited that you guys are interested as
Mm-hmm.
well in this topic.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say something, man. I hope that you and I can continue to work on a number of these issues together because your communities in the states, the 10 states and regions that you're working with, are very important to where we want to go in the future. And as we look toward the future, you already may know this, Duke, but we're celebrating our 100th anniversary as an association
Yes.
of the National League of Cities, our centennial year,
Mm-hmm.
2024. And all of the topics that you are talking about are topics that I know you're interested in,
Mm-hmm.
and so are we. And we have to partner in order to address these issues.
So I was going to end with a acknowledgement of your centennial, but you beat me to the punch. But let's figure out how to do that, because we have established 10 across because we believe, as you've observed, that this region of the country is the future. This is sort of the new America. This is not a cross section that cuts through the northern part of the country and the more well-established cities. This is the places where the cities are growing. They're becoming ever more diverse. The challenges of climate change are profound. if we're going to sort out the energy transition, how we're going to manage water, too much, too little, immigration, it's going to happen in this region. So working with you and the people that you have on your team who are interested in these same issues is a must do. I will say, though, while we're talking a little doom and gloom about why people aren't getting into public service, because of what we're hearing, and even though it's not in our corridor area, you've got to be gratified when you look at the 7 women of color, all under 40, being elected to the St. Paul City Council. And
Yes, I saw that.
yeah, I saw them, and a few of them were interviewed, and their enthusiasm for what government can be and what their obligation is to public service, and the fact that their community elected them to do that, and the honor that they see in that, and their determination to work together is sort of gratifying, and you just want to see more of that. And it shows that it still is possible.
I can tell you, we do want to end on a positive note. If I had a chance to do it all over again, I'd start right where I did and continue to serve my community, continue to go back to my community that didn't have a library when I got elected. And I knew in order to make life better, you got to be able to read and explore and read about places that you would like to go. And that's what I did as a kid in that mobile library, and say, one day I want to go to Washington, D.C. or Paris or Brussels. And I read about those places as a kid, never imagined I would, but I knew I could if I could. And the roads, we didn't even have paved roads, and to go back. And so even as you think about service, it's about purpose, it's about impact, and it's about clarity. And I've talked to my team about that a lot lately. I know that we got people in our communities that really do have purpose and clarity about their purpose and want to make a change. And I'm so excited about the future of cities, the leaders that are going to be elected, and the impact that the National League of Cities has had the last 100 years, and the impact that cities have had the last 100 years. If we think about it, if it wasn't for those local leaders, we would not have addressed many of the challenges that we have. And I want to thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. And one day, maybe you can come on Cities Speak with Clarence Anthony, my podcast, that really talk about that. But I don't know if I want you there until you become mayor. I'm just trying. I got to decide that. I'm not sure, Duke. What do you think? Mayor Ryder. That really does have a good sound.
You'll have to find some very needy small town that's desperate if I'm going to be that person. But when I come on your podcast, one of the things we'll talk about is, we talked about your background. I will tell you, having grown in classic suburban Ohio, not quite under the difficult circumstances you did, I didn't understand what a city was until I came to the city of New Orleans, never having seen it. And you mentioned mobile libraries. I remember those bookmobiles. I remember the smell of the books, and looking at exotic places. Mine was New Orleans. I'd never seen it till I eventually went to college there. And it changed my perspective on what a city is, the fragility of cities, the importance of place and people and environments, because New Orleans is certainly all that. And it begat the 10 Across Project, linking it with other cities. So we will have a great discussion on your podcast.
Well, thank you so much. And I appreciate the invite. I really do. And I admire the work that you're doing with our mayors, because as much connectivity and information that we can share, because what happens in one community impacts the other. So I'm so excited that you've allowed me this opportunity to speak to your listeners. So thank you so much, Duke.
It's our honor, and I got a feeling you and I are going to see a lot more of each other in the future, and I look forward to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.